Good evening, everyone. Thank you for turning out on such a dreadful night. Some colleagues will be joining us later, so just to let you know if there's any interruptions there. If I can just start with apologies.
So I have apologies this evening from Councillors Harvey, Martin, Pickering and Slade, and a sort of an apology from Councillor Corney, who's running late.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting.
So obviously you've had the minutes of this meeting on the 6th of December within the pack. Are there any comments or adjustments to make, or are we happy for those to be signed by the chair? Yes, sorry.
Okay. Item 2, members' interests.
Are there any members interested to declare on either of the items this evening? No? Good.
Item 3, overview and scrutiny work programme.
So obviously within the pack you've had the overview and scrutiny work programme and the current notice of the key executive decisions in there. Are there any comments or observations on that? I don't think, because it's been so close on the last meeting, I don't think there's been much change since the last time, but obviously if there's any comments or questions on that, there's a couple of meetings booked in for the working groups, so hopefully there'll be a bit of an update for next time, but if there's any comments on that? No? Excellent.
Item 4, corporate plan update.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Morley is going to update us with the presentation.
Happy New Year, councillors. Welcome back. Thank you very much. Very kind. So tonight, what I'm going to do is provide a sort of pale imitation of John Taylor, who is still on his sort of festive break. But this is an item that has probably attracted more interest from this committee than any other, which has been the kind of performance management framework within the council. A lot of interest, a lot of feedback throughout the course of the year. And what we wanted to do was give you an opportunity for an early sight on some of the national changes that are taking place, which are likely to influence how we manage sort of performance, and to give you the chance to kind of feedback and input into the performance management work that will take place over the coming months to ensure that we carefully track progress against the corporate plan and can demonstrate value in all we do for our residents. So that's the intent of today. So update and discussion, I think, is entirely fair. But just before I sort of launch into it, I would just like to note, as I say, John Taylor isn't here today. He's been the architect of a lot of this work, supported by Dan Buckridge as well. But I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Emma Charter, who's a core member of our sort of performance team and has been absolutely instrumental to a lot of this work today, and will join me in sort of answering questions, as I'm sure there'll be many of as we go through the presentation. Quick click on, please. So as I've updated, the intent of today is to update you on the next steps in terms of the corporate plan performance update, and indeed the performance framework, which you recently reviewed and was approved by Cabinet. To brief you on the government plans around best value and the consultation that they ran over the latter half of last year, and an update on the introduction of OFLOG, which is the Office of Local Government. Now, for some of you who've been in local government for some time, some of this stuff will feel a bit familiar, because it is a start of a sort of bit of a return to some sort of national performance indicators which are tracked, and where there's a degree of comparison between authorities on the back of it. So it's not quite CPA and best value indicators, but there is a hint of that in some of these areas that we'll go through today. And then, critically, to discuss how we as officers can bring back the updates on performance and what's happening back to you as members, and make sure that you can add value in the areas that you want, and apply the appropriate levels of scrutiny. And critical with all of this, and particularly with some members of corporate governance here today, is governance issues of this matter are, of critical importance to all of us. They're more than just sort of corporate governance items. So just a brief recap on what's happened with performance. So you may recall that if we go back 12 months or so, what we tended to have was quite a heavy document with lots and lots of tables, but where it was and huge numbers of performance measures, but it wasn't always easy to see the kind of direction of travel or to track kind of performance against target, or actually how those targets and performance moved over time, particularly for things with a degree of seasonality. So things like recycling rates, for instance, where more garden waste in the summer or more glass after a World Cup, for instance, will mean that you don't get a flat line for some of those performance factors. So there was a major restructure of our sort of performance management framework, and a review of how we manage performance against the corporate plan in terms of service delivery, but also projects and outcomes as a whole. Then, in the latter half of last year, what was brought forward, and Emma was a key architect of this, was a new performance management framework, updating on our previous performance management framework, which dated back to 2017, and which sought to do a number of things. So clearly linking the corporate plan and the outcomes to how we deliver things and the I care values that all officers are asked to deploy in everything they do. And stressing that overall assessment of our performance is very much linked to day-to-day performance. You know, that is absolutely critical in terms of how we do, and those links to operational metrics, which you see as a board, and which, you know, again, you provided lots of feedback on over recent meetings, but also that oversight of projects as well, budget management and risk assurance, and that new risk strategy which has come through the organisation as well, which really make up that suite of overall governance of what we're trying to achieve as a council. The performance management framework also set out how kind of management control was deployed through that, both in terms of internal board structures and how we engage with you and listen to feedback. And again, given the feedback and what we've heard from this body over recent times, we wanted a chance for you to reflect and feedback on how that felt and where you'd like to see more things. And that key link between members and sort of governance and performance. So that's kind of, you know, the work that's happened to date. So what comes next? So, as we sort of promised last year, and going back to the performance framework around the corporate plan, we will be reviewing the operational performance indicators against which performance is judged within the corporate plan. So, you'll recall last year that some work was done by officers that was then worked through with a cross section of cabinet members, including Councillor Ferguson, with his responsibility for customer and a range of operational services, Councillor Hassel in relation to his responsibility for corporate services and risk, and Councillor Mickelberg with his responsibility for finance. That reviewed the performance indicators and set a range of performance targets, which was then brought back to you as a scrutiny panel to review and comment on. That process is underway again. So again, there's a chance today for you to review and feedback any areas of concern or where you'd like to see more input. The second factor is what we call contextual measures. So one of the things we tried to do last year was separate out performance measures that relates to something that is under the direct control of the local authority, and more contextual measures, which is something that we'd be interested in as an authority, but we don't have direct control over. So things like the local employment rate or the number of people waiting for an operation, they're things we'd want to keep a track on. There's things we want to use our partnership to influence, but we haven't got direct control over. And they very much speak to things in our place strategy and other areas in terms of our partnership working as well. So we're bringing metrics forward in a range of areas there at the moment. We're working with partners. We have a place board where we meet with senior leaders from a range of partners, and we look at where there are issues in terms of those areas that collectively we need to respond to, such as things that, you know, an aging workforce or issues around housing affordability or other areas in that area. We've updated and improved the risk management strategy, as you're aware of. And again, I'm sure there'll be some areas of sort of feedback and interest in relation to that today. There's been significant work over the last year and on an ongoing basis around our project delivery framework. So we invested and improved our kind of project management leadership within the council. We have a chief delivery officer, so Liz Smith, who many of you will know from the garden subscription work, who's present at a lot of the meetings, heads up that function. But a lot of work is doing to raise the kind of cultural knowledge and understanding of project management as well. So we've done gap analysis against industry standard performance management frameworks. We're forming communities of practice across the organisation and training and rolling that out and improving the reporting mechanism in those areas too. One of the areas as we look to the future and around the use of technology and new technologies such as artificial intelligence and automation in a range of areas is about the quality of data And again, one of the key bits of work underway this year, which Dan and Emma are leading on, is a data maturity assessment. So looking at the quality of the data we hold in the organisation and where there's work that we need to do to better exploit that data and make better use of it. One area that we'll come back to as well is around unit costs. So some of you'll be aware from work we've done and awards we've won in areas such as waste that we do make a lot of use of unit cost data in certain areas of the organisation. So one of the public sector bodies that we link to is the Association of Public Service Excellence, who generate unit cost figures, particularly around operational services. We use those routinely to track our performance, to track how we are doing in terms of performance and cost. And as officers, we've used unit cost measures in a range of other services, but those areas haven't been traditionally sort of rendered up to members, and you haven't had the chance to review and see that. That is something that we're committed to working on over the coming year. But again, what we're conscious of is not blinding you with too much data, but making sure you have the chance to input where you want to, see what is valuable to you, but not be inundated with that. Peer review. So again, when I come on to the next slide and talk about best value, the government reviewed the best value framework over the summer in consultation with most of the big public sector and membership bodies such as SIPFA and Solace and others. One of the recommendations in there is about regular peer reviews of councils. Again, that basis of good governance across all authorities, and you will be aware that we've submitted an application for a peer review, and that's scheduled to start in May this year. So that's already something that's underway. And as you would expect, managers are working on their service plans for 24-25, joining up that golden thread from the corporate plan and what we're trying to do as an organisation right the way through to individual services. So as you can see, there's an awful lot there, and undoubtedly probably some areas where you can have questions or want to explore some of those things in more detail. But you can see why we want to bring this forward and give you a chance to shape an input at this stage. I'm not expecting you to read this, Councillor Corley. You'll be reassured. You'll be reassured to know. So there's some of the things that have happened locally, but we don't operate within a vacuum. We're always looking at best practice elsewhere, and obviously what's expected of us from statutory bodies. A couple of things have happened that are quite significant over the last 12 months and really started to ramp up. So one of the first things is the government has consulted on best value guidance and has really refined down what does best value mean. So best value is a long-term duty and that applies to local government, but a lot of work has gone into clarifying exactly what that means in practice. And through that work, and a lot of work took place with those professional bodies I mentioned, so SIPFA as the sort of the finance professional body in local government, Solace, which is a big membership organisation for most senior leaders in local government, were consulted and informed alongside the LGA and other bodies. But they identified 7 themes to best value within authorities, and they're listed there. So continuous improvement, leadership, governance, culture, use of resources, service delivery, and partnership and community engagement. Now, when you look through those, you'll see that a lot of those are items that you see routinely anyway. So things like our annual governance statement, we'll make comments on all of those. Our financial codes and governance statements around finance, again, cover a lot of those. But it really does go into detail on each of those key themes and draw out 3 things. And that's what the detail is on the right-hand side. So I can get the link afterwards for you to go and have a look at. But it gives a description in terms of each of those themes of what does that mean? What are they getting at when they say continuous improvement? They then describe the characteristics of a well-functioning authority. So what would you expect to see in an authority that is well-functioning and is applying continuous improvement effectively? And what they do in the third column is describe some of the things which could be areas of concern or potentially triggers for some concern to be, to be found about councils that are lacking certain things or displaying certain behaviours. So this kind of framework and these themes, again, have started to inform things like training programs for senior staff. So for the first time across the sector, there is the emergence of a range of training programs for senior leaders linked to those 7 themes. And overwhelmingly, this is a really positive step in the right direction. But again, wanted to make sure that you were fully briefed and had a chance to kind of review those and come back with any questions in those areas. So we can get links out to those areas. This will be the start of a conversation today. This is by no means the only chance, but did want to make sure that you were briefed and had a chance to reflect on those things before we move forward. So I've talked about the best value consultation. The other big change that's happened over the last 12 months is the launch of the Office of Local Government. So this is an office, it's not a department of local government. So at the moment, it's nested within the Ministry for Housing, for Levelling Up, and what was the Housing Communities and Local Government in old money. But what it's started to do is introduce a set of data measures that they're reporting against for all local authorities. So I'll talk you through what the measures are being used at the moment and where this is going in the future. But all of these measures are lifted from nationally reported figures that are already available. So this is data that we are already routinely reporting to government in one way or another. This is a public website. You can go in and check and have a look at how we're doing. And if you just click on, please, what you can then see and explore in this is for each of those measures. So what we have here is the household waste recycling rate as a percentage is the first column there. Resident household waste kilogram per household is the second one, and then recycling contamination rate percentage is the third. And what this is showing is how Huntingdonshire, as the dark blue dot there, is performing in relation to other similar authorities. Now, what you can see through the middle, for that sort of shaded zone that runs down the width of the slide, is a kind of median performance for England as a whole. So you can see for all of those, we're kind of above that kind of average range for local authorities, and we're in the sort of top half in terms of performance against those measures. But this is the kind of detail that you can see and go in and review and reflect on as we go forward. The key thing within all of this, and Offlog absolutely register it, is every area is slightly different. And the one thing with any kind of performance measure like this is it is somewhat dependent on the nature of the area that is being served, its geography, its contractual relationships, its mechanisms for collection. All of those are slightly different. So the headline measure is important, but it's often when you dig beneath it that you understand exactly why some of these things are exactly as they are. So this has been launched. This is now live. There's been consultation with the sector as a whole. More updates are coming, and this is being sort of rolled out on an ongoing basis at the moment. As I've said, metrics are all from existing data returns. Not all the metrics that are currently being measured are relevant to districts. So some of these are county or combined authority metrics. That is likely to lead to a bit of confusion for residents. But I think when I went back to that kind of contextual measures piece, what we see when we speak to residents again and again and again is they don't understand the distinction between different bits of local government anyway. So nonetheless, and that's why we have contextual measures of actually let's focus on those things that matter to people, irrespective actually at times of who is ultimately responsible, if we can influence and contribute to them. There is that aspect of benchmarking, which I flagged, but that ability to compare apples with apples is contextual to some extent. So there are times in which you could, you could immediately appear to be performing poorly, but actually, it's not as simple as that. So listed on the right-hand side there is the areas that Offlog have flagged as being areas of interest to them. I think it's fair to say, and at the risk of sort of prejudging your outcomes, if what the government's saying is important, it's critical that we measure and we track against them, but it doesn't always track perfectly with the feedback that we get from you as members about what's important to you. So that overlap and how we look at those two things next to each other, I think, will be important as we go forward. And the next area that Offlog are flagging as areas that they're looking to get measures around are business and economic growth and fly tipping. So you really do see that from the very, very strategic level right the way through to some of those more service level areas that they're looking to cover. But about 20 areas are covered in total at the moment in terms of those measures that are picked up. So I'm conscious there that we've galloped through a fair amount, but what I'm conscious of is a lot of that isn't new. These are conversations that we've been having on an ongoing basis for a number of years in some instances, and very much over the last 12 months as these things have cycled through this committee, and a lot of change has taken place already. So I think the key thing, and three of us here happy to answer questions, explore your thoughts and reflections on that, is what is your feedback? What are your thoughts? How does that feel to you? We have over recent times looked to focus on fewer, more critical performance measures. That's something that we've looked to do. The feedback broadly around that has been really helpful, but I think just to get some guidance back from you on that relative balance between how do we focus on those things that are absolutely critical, important, and give you the absolute clear signal of where issues are, versus how do we capture that wider network of measures that Offlog will inevitably be introducing as we move forward. Moving on to the third point, those offlog measures are critical. But I think one of the areas that we're reflecting is we will absolutely track those, we'll absolutely record those. But how would you like those to be monitored back to you? I think is one of the critical questions. And given that kind of quartile analysis, so comparing to partners and where are we in terms of those quartiles, might something around potentially reporting by exception as things change quartile or there's a major change in some of those areas be more helpful than duplicating some of those performance measures in terms of what's already reported in relation to performance against the corporate plan. And then those reflections on unit costs. So again, some of that work has been in the management space for some time now. What would you value seeing in those areas? And indeed, any other ideas or comments that you have. So conscious we've covered quite a lot there, but hopefully that gives you an oversight of what's going on, Councillor Gledo, and happy to hand back to you.
I just wanted to add to that is that if we're going to do this and put all the effort into monitoring things, they have to be useful numbers. There's no point in just in previously under the previous administration, this administration, been criticised for presentations full of green ticks. And what we want to do is we want to measure how well the council is performing and set targets, which I think stretch performance as well. I think in the context of the offlog and the best value stuff, I think it would be really useful for us to compare how this council performs to other authorities as well. If you look, in terms of, I'm fairly confident. I mean, having not looked at all the numbers, but in terms of my view of value, that under the previous administration, this administration, I think this district council offers excellent value. When you compare our precept of £155 a year against Fenham, which has got £240 a year and green bin charging, I think we deliver more for less than anybody else. But in order to keep doing that, we have to keep challenging ourselves, both in terms of measures and in terms of productivity as well. So I think this is all good news. I think there is a risk that we could confuse ourselves, like getting into a cockpit of a Boeing 747 and seeing hundreds of flashing lights and not understanding them. So we have to be very careful. But by that aside, I think the more data we can get, the more we can understand it, the more we can challenge ourselves. I think it's for the better.
Thank you for the presentation, Oliver. I think it's very useful, and you're quite right. We have actually touched on this in the past. This committee has touched on it in the past in terms of the performance measures, and were instrumental in some of the feedback and what we actually want to see moving forward. I will open it up shortly, but just if I may actually ask a question myself. You mentioned about exception reporting. My understanding of exception reporting perhaps might be slightly different to yours. Can you just be a little bit more explicit on that? Thank you.
So there are a range of ways we could do it, but it's simplest, Councillor Gaido. What I'd be sort of suggesting as one option would be that we report all the offlog measures. You get complete visibility of what they look like. We note where they are in terms of current performance and current quartile, and we then agree an exception tolerance around that by which you would want to be updated that there's an issue. So that could be, for instance, that it changes a quartile. I'd suggest that was maybe too broad, or it changes performance by, let's say, 5 or 10%, for instance, would be the flag for it coming back and being escalated explicitly, rather than you looking at long lists where potentially you don't get that kind of level of, you don't get the flashing light. What you just see is lots of numbers.
Thank you for the clarification. I'll open it to the floor. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Wait. Right, thank you. I would just say I would agree with Councillor Ferguson, is that I do think we need to see other neighbouring authorities that are similar to ours and to see how we are comparing to them, which I think would be very useful for all councillors, to look at how, say, East Cams or another similar authority. And I think if we can agree a certain number of those authorities, that would be quite useful. It's no good us comparing ourselves to a London borough because we're not a London borough, but we do need to see how we work in relation to that. And then I would be very interested to see, with regard to the unit costs, how that is broken down. So, if say a dust cart is doing 50 miles in Huntingdonshire, how much does it cost as against the same mileage in another authority? That might be quite a useful bit of information going forward. And then various, but I think we need to see it broken down in certain things, particularly those that relate to actual services that the district council do. We need to see it broken down quite tightly, and then if it does move, say, by 5 or 10%, then it should be coming straight back and saying why has it moved by that amount. It might be a perfectly valid reason, but I think until we've gone through it a few times, we won't actually know whether that's the right amount or whether it should be a higher figure.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I was just interested in the concept of data maturity, and I wonder if you just expand a little bit on what we mean by data maturity. I'm imagining that, you talked also about the usage of data, and I'm imagining that maybe there's a feedback loop between the quality and maturity of data and the use to which it's put, and maybe the one sort of feeds back into the other. Can you just expand a little on that? Thank you.
I'm going to pass to Emma, who'll give you a far more detailed answer on this than I will.
Thank you. The data maturity assessment tool is published by the Local Government Association, and it's a tool that's recently been revamped. So we did it a couple of years ago, just within a team internally, but this revamp has the new publication of it is part of our service plan in our team to look at how we can integrate that with the work that we're doing as part of the performance management framework, and it will be we look to collaborate with other members of the council, of our colleagues, to find out their assessment as well of our maturity. And so it may include things like data quality and understanding, does everybody understand that they play a role in data quality, whether it's inputting numbers, that does affect performance. And so it's really trying to understand how mature the council is in our data, really, and then it's a tool that you can use to assess that, and from that you get information about other councils that have perhaps done come out better in their assessment than where you did. So it gives you some pointers to look at, like to develop an action plan.
I think just to add to what Emma said there. So it's an LJ tool. It's kind of it's sort of standard across local government in terms of using it. And in broad terms, I think it looks at things like accuracy and structure of data. So to give an example, which is very pertinent at the moment, things like flooding incidents, for instance. How you structure and record data very much informs how you can use it, how you can overlay information, for instance, about is an issue on a street, how does that relate to the Anglia water holdings in that area, and and so on. So things like unique property reference numbers, which is something that are used quite heavily in local government, make it very easy to overlay 3 or 4 things to see whether a report that Anglia water or the Environment Agency have relates to exactly the same premise, or whether it's whether all we've got is a couple of digits of an address and we're not sure if it's that one or other. But it does tell you exactly where you are and give you those pointers to where you need to invest some time and effort in terms of clearing up some of that quality and some of the opportunities that could come from doing that. So these are business cases as we move forward will be a critical aspect of that as well.
It's a cliche, but the whole garbage in, garbage out thing as well. If we're going to be a data-driven organisation, which I think that we all want to be, we have to be careful that the quality of that data is high. I'm fairly confident we've got excellent people like Dan and Emma in the organisation who are data nerds who are doing an excellent job. But we need to make sure that's sorry about that, Emma. That's a philosophy that carries on, beyond the tenure of already current employees, and it's a philosophy and a culture we adopt in the organisation. So I think it's critical.
It's a very good point. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd wish you a happy new year, Oliver, and specifically to the cabinet member. I know how much he enjoys the exhortation after the 1st of January. I'd like to agree with Councillor Gardner that the offlog data looks really interesting. It is something I think we should be looking at here. I'll put in a plea that if we can possibly have a look at it at the time that we are setting the performance indicators themselves, I think that will give us some better context to know that if often we look fairly blind at these numbers and say 90% looks great, but if 90% is already at the very top end, then stretching ourselves to 91 or 92 might be sufficient. But if 90% is nearer the bottom, then perhaps we should be aiming for 95 or 96 type thing. And just one other comment as well is I was pleased to see that the peer review is going ahead in May, and just a question about whether the results of that review will be seen either by this panel or by corporate governance.
Undoubtedly. So it'll be published publicly. I don't know the exact details of exactly which committees it's going to, but it will be open to public scrutiny. You'll all have a chance to sort of comment and reflect on that. And undoubtedly, a number of you are likely to be involved. Peer reviews, people often drop in at public meetings like this and see the nature of the debate and that kind of stuff. So there'll be plenty of opportunities.
Thank you. I've taken part in peer reviews. They are quite interesting. Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair. My colleagues have finished my questions, but it doesn't matter. I'll still ask something. So the offlog stuff I think is great. The idea of that really gets me quite excited, and I'm not a nerd. But when we're looking at that peer group, as I understand it, and I totally get what you're saying, can I also plead that we're looking at those guys who are well ahead of us, perhaps, and really understanding what is it they're doing and how do we bring that here, if that's appropriate. I'd be much more interested in that than, yeah, we're performing well and we're out doing South Cams or whatever it might be. That's not terribly exciting. So that would be my one plea, would be there. And also on the data. The data quality, the data governance. I mean, having been involved in a bit of that myself where I work, I mean, and to the point you just made, I mean, it's in the hands of a few people at the moment. What do we need to be doing to build that sort of data governance culture and get, data owners or whatever that might look like? I would really encourage us to sort of get stuck into that, because as Councillor Ferguson says, if we're going to be a data-led organisation, the last thing we can have is when somebody decides to go off somewhere else and no so-and-so knows how to do anything then. So can I encourage us to build that into our thinking and planning? Thank you.
So just as a response to Councillor Gardner's point earlier, and that point there is with the offlog stuff, I think the charts that we see are automatically generated with statistical neighbours as well. Now, I think what Councillor Gardner was getting at is that ultimately it's all very well us talking about these figures, but actually we want to be able to tell it to residents, don't we? Who the people who pay council tax. We want to be able to demonstrate if our performance is excellent or poor as well. And so from that point of view, they would be less interested in some council up north somewhere and would be more interested, I think, in other Cambridgeshire and perhaps Bedfordshire councils as well. So it would help the understanding, I think, of our residents if we could get that data and put that on a graph as well. And unlike Councillor Corley, I am interested now performing other councils locally.
Okay, if I may, I'm very conscious of the fact that the staff are actually doing a lot of reports. And obviously with offlog, is that going to impact unduly as to the amount of time and effort that's going to be required in general performance?
So I'll tell that on Councillor Gledo. It's a concern. So we will be reporting. We have a statutory duty to report. It features in terms of statutory returns that we make anyway. So we will be doing that report. I think the balance here, and that's where I tested sort of thoughts in the room around potentially by exception, is what we don't want. I don't think is lots of time going into something that's available publicly on the website and won't necessarily add that value back. And I think that the feeling I've got from the room is that feels like it kind of links with your broad view too. Is that fair?
Councillor Corley.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. It just suddenly dawned on me there was a question I meant to ask. So offlog, it sounds awfully like Ofsted. Do we know, will there be any sort of a move towards there being inspections and sort of labelling or outstanding or need for improvement type sort of thing going forward?
It's very early days, I think, is what I'd say. So I've spent some time with the senior civil servant on briefings with him, who's got responsibility for leading this. So what he's absolutely saying at the moment is he has spent time with the leaders of Ofsted. He has spent time with the Care Quality Commission and looking there. So those conversations have taken place, and he's been very open about that. The fact it's just an office rather than a department at the moment means its powers are limited. And I think a bit like the conversations that are taking place around the Premier League at the moment, for instance, is another area. What they're pushing initially is self-regulation. This is what we're expecting of you, and as long as you can demonstrate this and you're moving in this direction, that's what we're looking for. But I think if they were uncomfortable with what they were seeing, I think the prospect has got to exist of a return closer to what we saw with the Audit Commission and that work historically. But I think that's not their first priority.
Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points, if I may, please. One of your slides mentions that managers are working on their service plans, which I would expect, but obviously it's just a little bit loose. I mean, their service plans are for their division and their responsibility, so I think we sort of need to be quite tight on those, and obviously regular reporting back to ourselves, because obviously they control their piece. Thank you. And secondly, obviously, more and more data as the chair said, to publish. And at committees in the past, we have sort of at times criticised display and delivery, and particularly when we're considering the member of the general public would like to obviously read or find out information relatively quickly. So on that basis, I think we need to really sort of keep it orderly and available for an easy read for the public, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Blackwell. So please take my reassurance in terms of service plans. So last year, every single service in the council submit their service plan by the deadline. All of those have been reviewed by all of the key corporate services, by finance, by HR, by IT, to absolutely make sure that what was in there was deliverable. And service plans will do two things. So some of them will contain corporate plan objectives, which will fall through and land in one of those service plans, and that will outline how they're going to do that. But there'll be other things which are really important, but aren't quite that corporate plan sort of basis, but will be picked up there. But again, they're all kind of reviewed by the cabinet member for those as well. So please be reassured that they're absolutely central and will contain a range of metrics which are critical to the running of the business, but probably aren't right at that level for public consumption, as you say, for the risk of not being able to see the wood for the trees. So please take my assurance on that.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. It was a very good presentation. I would just finally comment is basically I can understand that there's still a work to be done, particularly if you're actually looking at your exception reporting and what those measures are. And so I'm sure that the committee, all members would be happy to contribute towards that. Oliver, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, I said at the start, this is the start of a conversation. So if there are things that you reflect on when you go back and have a look at the performance pack and you're like, I don't like this or I don't like this, feed it in. If there's stuff you like, if there's stuff you don't like, if there's things that you think you find was useful. And what I've absolutely taken away from today, just to report back, is that thing about benchmarking, management term, but how are we performing in relation to others? So that's absolutely something that we will look to help to inform target setting and a range of things as we move forward. Offlog's emergent, and the stuff there is really good, but there is a whole host of other benchmarking that we use routinely. So I mentioned the Association of Public Service Excellence. One of the questions back to you is we can absolutely use that to inform the corporate plan targets, and we will. But if it would be useful, what we could do, and I think it was your point, Councillor Jennings, apologies if it was you, Councillor Gardner, if I've stolen it, but that thing about granularity If what you want is a real deep dive into some areas, what we could absolutely do is come up with a deep dive, for instance, on performance metrics in relation to operations, for instance, and bring the critical thing for me is not just performance, but that thing on cost. Because one of the things that will most differentiate areas out is the performance might be great, but if it's costing them 3 times what it's costing us, you need to know that. And I think that's where the unit costs are really important in relation to it, and one of the things we try and look at. So if that would be useful, we can absolutely look to try and bring something back, on that in areas of your interest.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 5, Huntingdon Place strategy. Thank you for your time there.
Good evening. I feel obliged to wish you all a happy new year. I think we'll all be doing that all evening. But actually, I'm really pleased to be following on from the conversation you've just had, because we've just been having a conversation around what we do and how we know that we're doing well and how we want to do more. And if you remember, the place strategy is that unusual strategy because it's not just about what we do, it's about our community. And unusually, this is a Huntingdonshire owned strategy, not an HDC owned strategy, but some of it is ours to do. But before I talk about that and get all excited about what we're doing, it's really important I introduce Lily to you. Lily, welcome. They're a nice group. They'll be lovely. Lily is the person we've been telling you is coming to join the team, and she's here. So Lily is our secret weapon to give us the time and capacity to do a lot of extra work alongside the work that Paul does and Neil does and others in the collective team that work around our place strategy, and to make sure we have capacity to deliver all the things that you have in mind, we have in mind, and more importantly, our partners, our residents and our businesses are getting excited about. So welcome, Lily. So I'm really excited about the strategy, but I don't have to tell you that, you know that. But just a reminder, we started with the question, what if? Tonight is an update on where we've got to with what if. It's really important we continue to stay in what if and the art of the possible. And it's a reminder that when we started this, it was around the bits that we can do, enable and influence. But interestingly, since Helen Lack beautifully coined that term, actually, we almost need to turn it on its head. It almost needs to be in influence, enable, do. Because the part of it that we do as a district council is relatively modest compared to the impact we need from the system if we are going to make the difference to residents and businesses that they and we collectively are ambitious for. So with that in mind, we're going to give you an update tonight. Just also to remind everybody, we've got a place strategy. It's kind of a thing in itself, but it's clever. Because if we work smart, a lot of the things we do will overlap and segue into the other strands of work that are already in our corporate plan. So some things that we effectively talk about under place will fit beautifully alongside the community strategy that's emerging. Some things will fit brilliantly alongside the economic development work that we're doing. Some of those things will sit very well amongst our community strategy. Some things will sit outside of that, and some things will not sit here as an organisation. They'll sit with our partners and with those we are working with on that bigger scale. So I think that's just important to remember. I'm also just going to give a caveat. When we were looking at this presentation, we were aware there are a number of big things coming up this year for Huntingdonshire as an entity. You know, we might just have a birthday this year as an organisation. And we started using the word celebrate. Now, I'm guilty because I've worked in local government on and off for a very long time in my professional life. But I also come from a teaching background. And for me, celebrating is around what makes a person, a place, a thing special. It isn't about having a party and getting the beers in. Really sorry about that. For anybody who thinks if I use that word tonight, that's what I'm talking about. That's not what's in my mind. So we then took celebrate out. But actually, every time we talk about it, we come back to this is about celebrating what makes Huntingdonshire special. What makes each community special? What are we trying to achieve together? So it is a celebration, but I just wanted to put that caveat out there. it's a celebration about being unique and special rather than necessarily throwing a huge party, although we're not ruling that out for communities that may wish to do it. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who are going to give you our update.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Conboy. Good evening, Chair. Good evening to the panel, and of course, a happy New Year to you all as well. So over the last 12 months, this panel has been a really valuable asset to our project work. Initially, as you know, you helped us with the final shaping of the place strategy last year and the adoption of Huntingdonshire Place strategy. Of course, that work has now evolved into Huntingdonshire Futures. The panels provided an exceptional space for the required check and challenge and the rigour that we've needed to help develop our work. You may recall in October of last year, we reported the progress so far of Huntingdonshire Futures. We delivered our October update and we explained to the panel about the 2 journeys that we had launched at that point, which were, of course, health embedded and inclusive economy. We noted, and obviously Councillor Conboy has picked this up perfectly, that we were going to onboard a dedicated resource to the project. Of course, we welcome Lily to the team and to HDC, and it's great that she's here this evening as well. And you may also recall that we explained our intentions to generate some activity in the spring of this year to coincide with Huntingdonshire Day, which of course occurs on the 25th of April. And we entitled this activity A Festival of Place. I think at that time, what we heard from the panel when we delivered our broad update is that you were very keen to engage with the Huntingdonshire Futures work, so that you were keen to engage and to help shape it for the future. And of course, it's worth noting, I think, just quickly at this point, that we as a team, we will be back to deliver a broad update of the Huntingdonshire Futures project later in the spring, so in a few months' time. But it's with that spirit of engagement that we come to this evening's session. Not only, I think, will this help you update yourselves in terms of our current thoughts with the festival activity, but we'll be asking for your critical thinking, your engagement, and for you to help us shape the spring activity. And so to be clear, this evening's update is specific to what makes Huntingdonshire special, so the Festival of Place, and how that will play its part as we deliver Huntingdonshire Futures as a project. And so we'll pose some questions, thoughts and suggestions during tonight's presentation, but critically I think it's your feedback, ideas and thinking around the next steps which will enable us to shape this activity. Next slide, please. And so just sort of covering off the background, obviously, as we know, Huntingdonshire Futures was born as a result of the creation of the Huntingdonshire Place strategy. This co-designed document was a result of the largest consultation exercise undertaken across the district. We established and ran over 30 events in a summer, autumn and winter of engagement across 2022 and 23. And these events spoke to residents, communities, colleagues across our town and parish councils, the business community, and of course young people from across the district as well. And as a result of this activity, 5 journey themes emerged from this work, and of course, as we know, they are Pride in Place, Travel Transformed, Environmental Innovation, and of course the 2 journeys which we launched, Health Embedded and Inclusive Economy. So the following slides relate to the activity that we're proposing in the spring. So linked to some of the journey themes and reflecting the discussions which have taken place so far within the launched journey groups. So next slide, please. Okay, so why celebrate? As Councillor Conboy has noted, there's a number of key dates throughout 2024, including some notable anniversaries for the council. We have Huntingdonshire Day, as we've noted, and there's also an anniversary a bit later on this year as well. And of course, we've got the strategies we've noted, we've started some of the journeys, and we've got some work to undertake broadly throughout the year. But I think it's the 3 areas that we want to note out today are the 2 journeys that we've launched, both around health and economy, and also reflecting on some of the celebrations which will naturally dovetail into Pride of Place as well. Next slide, please. And so if we reflect on the health embedded activity, and you may recall, obviously, when we came to the panel in October of this year, we disclosed that the working group had met a few times. In these meetings, they'd identified a gap in current health provision, notably around loneliness and social isolation. But we didn't necessarily want to frame our activity in this exact way. So these themes could be construed as having slightly sort of negative connotations, which is why our what ifs in this space and our activity are proposed around togetherness. So you can see from the slide and sort of the pasted pathways from the original place strategy, just how these activities relate into the themes from the original strategy around loneliness and happiness. And so the principles that we're posing are centered around activities which bring people together. So connecting those that may not normally or naturally meet in their day-to-day lives, and creating the time and space for those who may experience challenges around maybe emotional or mental health. Next slide, please. We move into the economy theme. Again, as with the previous working group, the working group around inclusive economy, they've also met a number of times, and we reported into the panel in October just how this group would like to explore opportunities in terms of connecting people with meaningful opportunities. Again, you can see some of the pathways from the original strategy, where we wish for our organisations across the district to actively support young people and to help try and create a culture of lifelong learning for all of our residents of all of our ages. And so our what-ifs on this slide are based around skills and opportunities, prompting the thought of actually how we can create new connections to help benefit the young people across the district. How can we invest in skills which might support employability, and harnessing tech which may provide opportunities for local schools. And then just a footnote and a question maybe to ponder across this particular activity, and that the fact that this is inclusive economy. So how can we demonstrate inclusivity as part of this activity moving forward? Next slide, please. And so if we focus more onto place in the district itself, encouraging both a connection and pride with the places where we live and where we work. Activities that will launch our Pride in Place journey, and activities which are designed to enrich the connection that we feel about the place where we live across the district. And again, trying to link back to the observations that were captured when the place strategy was completed and compiled. Our identity as a place, our levels of community resilience, and then capitalising on some of the assets that we naturally hold, our high streets, and the potential to bring people together, both socially and, of course, culturally. And so our what-ifs in this particular area around organising activities that can improve our local areas, events that have the power to bring communities together, and highlighting our great heritage and history wherever we live. Next slide, please. And so what outputs might we achieve? So if we achieve what has been described, there are many outputs that could be derived. And I suppose our question is, which resonate mostly with yourselves? Where do you think the opportunities may lie? As someone who's been involved with the project since the very early days, I can remember that obviously one of our founding principles is how we want to try and encourage our partners to work differently together. So how can our communities, stakeholders, businesses and others work differently together in the context of this festival activity? How can members champion these different activities and outputs? Next slide, please. And when we focus on outcomes, what could the various outcomes described on this slide provide for our residents and the wider district? Better health could take pressure off public services such as primary care. They could also help our working population achieve greater productivity to enrich our economy and give greater meaning. Greater community cohesion could achieve greater resilience across our wards and parishes, and creating a better Huntingdonshire for our younger generations could help redefine that previous narrative where perhaps the district may be a pleasant place to grow up before in adulthood people work and they move away perhaps to other areas in the UK. So could this work provide a touchstone? Could it become a project, and could it be the vision for our future talent and the people who may inherit our districts over the next 20 to 30 years of this project? Could it help them reimagine a place where they can see opportunities which are relevant to their needs and aspirations here on our patch without having to consider a life elsewhere? Next slide, please. And so how best to try and do this in 2024? Again, you can see some of the areas in which we may wish to identify and bring some of this together, looking at the opportunities around our local plan. We've mentioned broadly around this particular project, we are more in the influencing and enabling space, but there's a number of key opportunities potentially in which we can do much in both of those spaces. And then again, looking at the do and some of the things that we've done previously, speaking particularly in my day job in economic development, where we hosted a manufacturing summit, which supported both local businesses and actually supported some of our funding requirements through central government. Next slide, please. But I think the most important thing really is to touch on some final thoughts for yourselves as the panel to consider. So firstly, obviously, when we open the floor, some feedback from this evening, which would be interesting to hear. And then maybe thinking about actually how we can capture any of your thoughts and reflections beyond tonight's session, reflecting on some of the feedback that we received in October. For example, would a member workshop, would that be helpful to move this forward? Would that involve just members of this panel, or would we want that to be an all-member session on this occasion? Which groups in your respective wards might want to engage with just some of the activities that we've outlined and some of the what-ifs that we've described this evening? How could you as members be advocates for some of that activity that we've described? And how can we as a project team, how can we make it easier for you to get those messages, particularly into some of those harder to reach places? And when thinking about shaping this activity, what do we need to do as a project team so that we can help land this in both our larger, more populated areas and some of our smaller, more rural areas? What do we need to consider? And trying to take a few steps forward, if we can imagine that we have some sort of shaped proposal before we're able to launch that, would it be helpful to bring it back into this space again for a final check and challenge before we launch? And lastly, is Huntingdonshire Day, April the 25th, is that a realistic and is that a feasible date to focus on? Does that resonate with the panel? And so thank you once again for the opportunity to update yourselves this evening. We will, of course, as promised, we'll be back later in the spring for a broader project update. But I think what I'll do is I'll pause at this juncture, obviously look forward to your feedback, your ideas and your thinking around the next steps for this proposed piece of work, a festival of place, which will in part help to deliver Huntingdonshire Futures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You certainly posed some interesting questions to us. Thank you. Makes a nice change, doesn't it? Yes, Councillor Gardner, of course. Of course.
Am I on now? You're on now. I do think it would be a good idea with regard to the workshop to have that for certainly this committee, but this panel, but I think it probably would be better to have it for the whole council in its entirety. I do think it may well be at the same time, if you want to get the parishes involved in, which I think you do need to get, I think we should look at the same way as we had the planning meetings with parish councils. I think it would be a very good idea to do a similar for this, where you invite the chairman and say, and the clerk, or two other named from each parish council, so that they could then hear what you're talking about and then perhaps suggest other things, because they're on what you might say the coalface. So it would be quite useful to get their views before you go too far down the line. Huntingdonshire Day, the 25th of April, well, you may say that's a bit early if we're trying to do all those other things before we launch, in which case would you not?
Groups. There are quite a lot, that like a couple I'd spotted in there. You said about people on hobbies and passions. The one I'm involved in already runs a hobby hub, so so maybe sort of getting involved with the Health Inequality Project team and possibly what was the COVID recognised orgs, which I'm not sure what it's now titled as, but
Good to go.
there we go.
Councillor Conway.
I was going to say, can I just say this? So we're still on. This is brilliant stuff, thank you. And these are all the sort of conversations we've been starting to have, but absolutely, we want to engage it with all of the right people. You need to tell us who ought to be in the room, or if not in the room, how we engage, where we engage, and all of your communities are particularly unique. And that's going to be one of our real challenges. It's not just about scale and size and location, it's the fact that every single community is a unique community that operates a little bit differently. So the answer is we want to know what will work.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Councillor Gardner's view on this, and certainly I think it would be great to energise our town council in this context. However, of course, there are other groups which we need to engage as well, and we've got other groups in St Ives who I'm sure would really welcome getting involved. I just had a thought on Huntingdonshire Day itself, really, and just that because of the significance of the 50th anniversary and so forth, it just would seem a little bit of a shame if we can't leverage it in some way, shape or form, even if it's only at a very early stage of the process. I just wonder whether there's anything we could actually do, make use of it for. Thank you.
Councillor Jennings.
Just very briefly, as I think the only person here who represents a ward that was never in the old Huntingdonshire, as we were in Bedfordshire until 50 years ago. But clearly, St Neots being the largest town, has historically not felt as engaged with the rest of Huntingdonshire as perhaps some other places. And I would hope that you would use the leverage of your significant number of cabinet members from our neck of the woods to try and G them up, because I still think there is a very much a them and us attitude that's prevalent in the town, that feels that they really don't have a great deal to do with the rest of Huntingdonshire, and it should be something that should be encouraged.
If I may respond, we've talked about inclusive economy, but we also talked about including everybody, and it really, really matters. And interestingly, there will be other communities which are not the scale of St Neots, but will also kind of say, well, it's only about St Neots and it's not about us. And that inclusiveness for every community, and even our biggest settlements, how do we make sure that everybody in that settlement feels part of what's going on? And do we need to do that at micro scale? Because sometimes we do everything at macro scale. We do a single event for a big community. Would it be better to do lots of small events? Actually, would that get a different type of engagement? Would it be more inclusive of everybody within that particular location, not just our big market towns, but it could be any of our settlements from the smallest hamlet to the medium-sized village? I think that's one of our challenges, but that's the bit we're really interested in. But yeah, I take your point, and I know that it has been a contentious issue in St Neots. They are very much part of Huntingdonshire, but they're very much their own place as well, and that's the real challenge with the place strategy, isn't it? Actually, you can belong to a bigger whole without losing what makes you and your local identity fundamental in your community. Because if you ask people where they live, they tend to talk about where they live as their home address location first, whether it's a village or it's a town or it's a tiny hamlet. That's what they talk about first, and then they go up in scale too. And I'm in Huntingdonshire or Cambridgeshire, or I'm in East Anglia. They're very well made and understood.
Yeah, really, just to actually point out that there are at least 5 different communities within St Neots, some of whom don't enjoy actually being lumped in with the rest of St Neots.
Sorry. And if I may, Chair, and the real challenge as well is not only that geographic separation, but if you think of it by age, you think of it by interest, you think of it by ethnicity or faith or any of the other things that people would identify them seeing as part of some form of community. That's a real challenge for us, isn't it? But that's a challenge in lots of our places. So again, how do we make people feel included everywhere? That comes back to inclusive economy, but it comes back to pride in place and feeling that it belongs to you, it doesn't just belong to some. So all up for those conversations, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to just point in myself. I agree with Councillor Gardner. I too went to the planning events, and they were actually incredibly well attended. And what I actually took away from it was the workshops afterwards, because you then got a mix and mixed of everyone. Where obviously someone like myself in a market town, I don't always get exposed to the smaller ones. So I actually found it incredibly helpful. But that's just a personal point of view. So, but, Councillor Cawley?
Thank you, Chair. Just as I was listening to what you were saying there, I agree. I think it'd be a shame to miss the opportunity of Huntingdonshire Day. It's like Huntingdonshire Day. You can see I'm really bought into that. Huntingdonshire Day, I think if it's not the whole thing, then we mustn't miss that opportunity, because it would be a great sort of peg in the ground, as it were. I think as well, but the other point that I really wanted to make was about one size fits all. I think we should avoid one size fits all completely. I think what I would love to see is a sort of a menu of lots of opportunities that local communities could decide we could do that, we'll have that. Back to your point, Councillor Conboy, about ownership. And I know that some of my villages, some will want to do some things, others will want something.
Points have been covered off, but just to support or endorse Councillor Wells and Cawley, that I agree we should aim for Huntingdonshire Day too. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Howe.
Yeah. You've got up on your next steps role of this panel. Would a task and finish group be appropriate, or would that not be? It does.
Yeah. So interesting. We talked about that in the pre-meet for what we were bringing this evening, and I think the answer is yes. Whether it's quite a task and finish group or whether it's a bigger member group, and I think it's that thing about. I think if you've got the appetite to do it, we've got a team of people who are keen to work with you, and you need to shape this and help grow and develop this so that it genuinely works everywhere. We are really conscious that that one size fits all doesn't work. And actually, one of the real challenges as well is if we do this, what is helpful for communities, whether it's a small group, a big group, whether it's a large space, what actual practical help and support do people need? How do we make it easy to get involved and take part? What's the simplest way of getting people excited about this and kind of go, I could do something? Because something could be really small but really important in that community, or it could be something really quite big, because some communities will have capacity and kind of go, oh, we know how to do that. But some of it might literally be getting 5 or 6 people together to do something exciting locally, because actually that's what's needed in that particular place. And there's a group of people excited about it. So we're up for that, whether it's a task and finish group, whether it's a slightly bigger group. I think the most important thing is it's inclusive of councillors and your communities, because on the ground who's out there, who needs to get involved, what makes it easy for people to take part and get excited about this sort of thing, so that it's not ours, it's theirs, it's yours. That's the bit we're trying to achieve. We don't want it to be HDCs. We want it to belong to whoever is excited about doing something so that they own it. And we just want to make that as easy as possible to happen.
Are there any other?
Can I just say, I think that's spot on what Councillor Conboy said. I see you almost want something they can come along, take it off the shelf, and it's like, did I say an idiot's guide? I do this, then I do that, and I do that. Yeah, we can do that. Let's go for it. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. That's an influencing role. That's an enabling role, and we're not doing it all for them, which I totally agree with.
Are there any other comments? Oh, Councillor Gardner.
No, that's all. I totally agree, and the 25th of April is fine for Huntingdonshire Day if you want that. But I'm just thinking, if you've got a parish councils or groups that want to do something a bit bigger, they might want to do something more in the summer months when they can get outside and perhaps do certain functions. So we need to try, as Councillor Corley says, is to try and sort out, give them a list of different things they can do to incorporate it. But I wouldn't want a parish or a village or a town or a group to feel that if they can't do it for the 25th of April, then they're not involved. That would be totally the wrong message we'd be giving out to them. When they can do it within their group and organisation, that should be fine. It shouldn't be down to a specific day. But if there's something across the whole district that we could do to get them involved on the 25th to launch it, say, fine. But we shouldn't then prevent parishes, groups, or whatever, towns, St Neots in all its various parts, from doing things on different dates and times that suits their community to celebrate Huntingdonshire. That was the only comment I had to make. Thank you very much, Chair.
And that was a comment brilliantly worth waiting for. Thank you. Genuinely, because it was spooky. You'd have thought you'd have maybe sat in the room with us when we've been talking about the logistics of timings and how long, if you're going to organise something, whether it's a micro scale thing or it's a big thing or it's a quick thing or it's a long lead thing. Actually, April's actually going to come round remarkably quickly. However, having said that, it's our birthday all year. So it might be that that's the launch. The real challenge for us is that means that getting member engagement and getting this up and running will have to be pretty quick off the stocks if we're to share this with people that we will then want to take advantage of it. Because actually, if we're saying that some of this they might want to be doing as early as the summer, then the answer is we've got to be up and running pretty quickly because that will take a little bit of planning on their part. So I think if you're up for that time scale, we're up for that. It will test all of us because it'll be the first challenge will be, and when can we get people together? But we'll try and work at that pace. And the real challenge will be, we might not get everybody around the table all of the time, but if you can help us explain that with a bigger group of members to make sure we're hearing everybody, even if logistically it'll feel pretty quick. But we're up for that, I think, aren't we, team? Yeah. Nods on this side because they're going to have to do a lot of the enabling in order to get the doing to happen elsewhere.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions before I? Oh, Councillor Wells.
Yeah, just and with my other hat on St Ives Town Council, we are finalising precept the week today. In actual fact, yeah. So I think it just struck me it would be a golden opportunity to flag up the place strategy to town councillors so that they are aware. We have a number of grant applications coming in, some of which will be very pertinent to this in actual fact. So if I can try and energise the town councillors to think about the applications in the context of this. I think that might be very helpful on both sides. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Well, it's just, I'd like to close the meeting and remind you all that I'll see you later in this month for our next committee meeting. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you for your time and efforts. And